tech billionaires Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos want in on the Trump train. Both men have reportedly donated $1 million to President-elect Donald Trump's inaugural fund.
Now, you may be sitting on the couch scratching your head as to why they would do that now. And the answer seems to be simple, which is access. Meta, which came under fire for its content moderation policies back in 2020, has eased up. In early December, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram admitted that error rates are too high when enforcing content moderation policies. They pledged to improve their policy rollouts. The company's president of global affairs, Nick Clegg, said the policies get in the way of freedom of expression. He later told reporters he regrets the large amount of COVID-19 related content it removed from the platform.
Here's where things get even more interesting. Recently, conservative commentator Ashley St. Clair claimed that Meta is, quote, actively censoring conservatives right now. Elon Musk responded, concerning. Just weeks before the election, Bezos was criticized for not allowing the Washington Post editorial board to endorse a presidential candidate. Critics saw the move to stop endorsing presidential candidates as an attempt by Bezos to curry favor with Trump in the event that Trump would win a second term.
Well now, quite a bit here in terms of both the tech world and its content moderation policies, which is one element of this story, and then just the currying favour with Trump, which is a second one. I think in the case of Jeff Bezos, for example, it is pretty obvious that he is making nice with Trump. We could argue about the rights and wrongs of it. The furor about the Washington Post endorsement, I thought, reflected very badly on Bezos and his stewardship of the Post. Not because I think the Washington Post needs to make an endorsement, but I think leaving it until the very last minute. If they wanted to stop endorsements, they should have announced that at an earlier stage. And so that, coupled with various other things, just seems like a kind of cozying up to power. And similarly, you could make a broadly similar argument in Mark Zuckerberg's case. But what do you make of it all, Amber?
Yeah, I tend to agree that the Bezos move was obviously opportunistic. I don't think anyone believes he's had some massive political conversion over the past year. I mean, him and Trump had a very notably acrimonious relationship during his first term. Trump would constantly tweet about the Bezos, Amazon, Washington Post, and would threaten regulation or to come after him, et cetera, et cetera. And Bezos would respond in kind. But the Zuckerberg question is a little bit different, I would say, because as skeptical as I am of his intentions as well, his political sea change appears to go back a little bit further. According to people who are relatively close to Zuckerberg, they say he's always had a little bit of a libertarian streak. He's never been a card-carrying, Democrat, although he did spend $400 million in the last presidential election for voting rights, policies.
For the public good of allowing people to vote more.
Only all Democrats, but sure. So I'm not sure how much I buy that he's like, he's always been a libertarian. But I will note the past few years, every 4th of July, he puts out this video of him surfing, and he has an American flag, and he's drinking a beer, and he's clearly trying to clean up the perception that Meta is a company that is biased against conservatives, which I would argue it is, but that's probably a different debate. And before the election even, he comes out and praises Trump after the assassination attempt. Then he dumps $1 million into the inaugural fund. So I guess the bottom line here is my view on this is that they're both opportunistic, but maybe Zuckerberg about 1% to 2% less.
You're being generous. No, I don't really disagree with that. I mean, I think that Zuckerberg has. I think a point that you made that I think is really worth highlighting is the idea that Zuckerberg's evolution, even if it has a large measure of opportunism attached to it, does seem to have taken place over a longer period of time. And I do think that there have been some, to my mind, genuine grapplings with the issues around how do you crack down or dilute misinformation versus how do you stop that from toppling over into an overly censorious kind of approach. And I think that's part of it. Now, I do think it is also important, and here's where I would probably put the stress a little bit differently to you. Some of the comments that Trump has made, in Zuckerberg's case, outright threatening these people, suggesting that if the conduct in the election just passed had been the same as in the 2020 election, that Zuckerberg would have been thrown in jail if Trump won, and language like that. That seems to me one of those examples where Trump is able to say things and be met in some part with a kind of shoulder shrugging that if any other politician said it, it would be a massive firestorm about authoritarian leanings and all of that.
Maybe so. I do think that the context of Trump in general and the way he uses language as a tool to negotiate is important here. He very much says the extreme in the hopes of getting somewhere in the middle. And I think when you approach it from that perspective and know that about him and his style, it does dampen the idea that he's some authoritarian, particularly since during the first term he did not follow through on any of the supposed threats he made about Hillary Clinton being thrown in jail, right? During that debate between them, she said, I hope you never get power. And he said, yeah, because you'd be in jail. And then completely abandoned anything related to the email scandal when he actually got into office. And he said recently in his NBC interview with Kristen Welker that he wants to be a uniter, that he has respect for every person, even if they didn't vote for him. And I do think this is a fundamental difference between the way Trump talks about politics versus the way a lot of other politicians talk about it, which is that Trump attacks his opponents, but never really the voters. You don't hear him really talk about Democratic voters in the same condescending, elitist, nasty way that a lot of Democrats talk about Republican voters.
I'm just thinking about that, whether that is true or not. It is true, I think, that he doesn't generally condemn Democratic voters. He has said those very controversial things, about black voters, what the hell do you have to lose, and so forth, which I think some people have taken as patronizing to black people. But I suppose where I differ from you, Amber, is that I see the point that you make about, well, he uses it as a negotiating position. But isn't the use of the language itself coarsening of our politics, in the sense that if candidates just go around all the time threatening to lock up the other person, then that in itself is damaging, even if the other person ends up not being locked up?
It just feels hypocritical, though, with the left having gone after Trump for the past 3 years, right? I mean, with the number of indictments that they've lobbied against him, a lot of them, frankly, in very ridiculous cases that would have never been brought against anyone else. I mean, the fraud case in Manhattan seems an obvious one to me, where they somehow evaluate Mar-a-Lago at $18 million when it's this huge beachfront resort where the land alone is worth $18 million. It just feels kind of rich that Democrats and the left are like, oh my gosh, Trump's going to use lawfare against us. Y'all have been doing this for the past 3 years. I mean, where do you really get off accusing Trump of being the fascist or the authoritarian? And I take your point about the language. I don't like the idea of America being a country like so many in Africa, where as soon as the person in power leaves office, they get thrown in jail for 8 years, and then vice versa. But it feels like we've already crossed into that Rubicon, so to speak. And I also think that sometimes when Trump talks about throwing people in jail, it's because they've done things that are illegal. I don't know whether or not that's the case with Mark Zuckerberg's election spending, but when you're talking about people at the DOJ who signed off on FISA warrants with false information to spy on members of the Trump campaign, people who were perjuring themselves in front of Congress about whether or not they were funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. If you committed a crime and you're a public official and you hurt the American people by doing that, then I don't have any problem with Trump saying that they should go to jail.
I mean, I think we just disagree on this. We've been told to wrap, but briefly, I think I do have problems with the New York fraud case. I do think that any citizen who did what Trump did in the Mar-a-Lago case would be done for obstruction of justice. I think it was obstruction of justice on its face. But I have now talked over you for the last word, which I didn't mean to do.
No, it's totally fine.
We'll give Amber the last word next time around. More topics after this.